Hi, thank you for coming. I'm Kathy Moore. I'm president of Kol HaSkala, which is one of the sponsors of this program tonight, along with Jewish for Good and the Society for Humanistic Judaism. Kol HaSkala is a local humanistic Jewish congregation that was formed in 2001. We are a do-it-yourself congregation. We are members of the Jewish for Good and the Society for Humanistic Judaism. In the past, we have had high holiday services, a vibrant Sunday school, a community Seder every year, and we observe other major holidays like Hanukkah and Purim, and we had about the B'nai Mitzvah program. We've had taken a hit with COVID, but we are coming back now, and that's one of the reasons for this program. We hope that tonight's program will give you a glimpse of what humanistic Judaism is, and that you would be interested in following through with more events with us. So with that, I will let Paul Golin, our speaker, introduce himself and start the program. Thank you for coming.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Paul Golin. I'm Executive Director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And I will talk a little bit later about what humanistic Judaism is if you're unfamiliar. I've been at SHJ for a little over 6 years now. And before that, I worked for about 16 years at an organization that was pluralistic. We worked across denominations. We worked with JCCs and Jewish federations, specifically on how to better engage and welcome interfaith families. And I bring that to this talk today, but my work at SHJ really continues that. And again, I'll get into how it relates to welcoming interfaith families into the Jewish community. I'm going to share a PowerPoint. Can you all see this?
Yes.
So first of all, I want to thank Kol HaSkala and Jewish for Good for hosting this conversation. I think this will be a little bit different than what you may have heard about Jewish intermarriage. So I want to start with what has been the traditional narrative around intermarriage in the Jewish community over time. Do folks know what this is a screen grab of? Is this familiar to you? So this is Tevye the milkman from Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna maybe give you a spoilers warning, but it's a 50-year-old movie. So if you haven't seen it yet, it's your own fault. And I won't ruin it. It's beautiful music and everything. Hopefully you've all seen it. But the story is, and I'll share it for the next slides, but you don't need to keep looking at Tevye. What happens in the play and then the movie and the short story, he's cursed by having 5 girls and no boys, right? And in the shtetl, where it was up to the girls' families to provide the dowry for weddings, and he was already poor, it was a big challenge for him. So he, you know, and all of his girls rebelled in different ways. And he would go on the one hand this, on the one hand that. Like one girl wanted to get married for love instead of through a matchmaker, etc. And each time he accommodated modernity, right? And then, of course, the final blow was his daughter who wanted to marry someone who wasn't Jewish, and there was no other hand, and he disowned her. And that's kind of the moral of the story. And what's so fascinating about that is when it came out in the late 60s and the movie in the early 70s, it was already a nostalgia for a past age, because at that point, Jews in America were already intermarrying at a rate of 33% from 1965 to 1970. And the Jewish community was freaked out about it. So Fiddler on the Roof kind of captured this moment, but it was already presenting an approach that a lot of Jews were already moving beyond. So where are we on intermarriage today? we've had 2 surveys now from the Pew Research Foundation, and there had been previous surveys of the Jewish community done by the Jewish community, but these were the first 2 major demographic studies of American Jewry conducted by an organization that wasn't a Jewish organization. So in 2013, they found 5.3 million total adults. And when they redid the study in 2020, they found 5.6 million adults, Jewish adults in America. And that is the most Jews in the US at any time in history. So what was the narrative around intermarriage for literally 40 or 50 years before 2020? Jews are going to disappear because of intermarriage and assimilation. And if you Google the phrase intermarriage and assimilation, you will see them paired almost all the time as synonymous, and it's not synonymous. I grew up in the conservative movement where in the late 70s, early 80s, it felt like almost every survey from the pulpit was a condemnation of intermarriage. And from a very young age, I felt really put off by this because, first of all, my uncle had married a lapsed Catholic, so it felt like they were talking about my uncle. But also, I went to public school. I was hearing values from my own parents and community to judge people as individuals and not as part of a group, except when it comes to marriage, and then judge them by what group they're in and only marry Jewish. I heard that conflicting message growing up, and it felt like hypocrisy even before I knew the word hypocrisy. This continues, by the way, to today. There was an article as recent as last week about Hebrew College. I don't know if you know this, but Hebrew College ordains rabbis for the liberal Jewish denominations, Reform, Reconstructionist. It's independent, but their rabbis work at congregations for the liberal denominations. And just last week, they dropped the requirement that rabbinic students not be in interfaith partnerships or relationships. The Reform movement maintains that policy. But the Pew survey said in 2013 that intermarriage may be transmitting Jewish identity to a growing number of Americans. They actually attributed the growth of the Jewish population in part to intermarriage. Now, how does that work? I'm going to get into statistics, a little bit of math, but it won't be too complicated, and you will not be tested on them. This last Pew survey in 2020 found that 42% of all married Jews are married to somebody who's not Jewish. So this top line is net married Jews. 58% spouse is Jewish, 42% spouse is not Jewish. Here's the thing though, that is an individual rate, right? What is the result of individual rates of intermarriage? I'll get to that in a minute, but you can also see at the bottom, they break it down. They asked respondents, when did you get married? And you can see how those who got married in the last 10 years, the rate is actually 61% intermarriage, and it is increasing from previous years. But understand that this is an individual rate. When you ask yourself, what happened, what is created by this rate, it becomes a household rate. So what is the household rate when 42% of individual Jews are intermarried? And I'm going to talk about Jews of no religion later in the piece, but you'll see that Pew breaks us down by Jews by religion and Jews of no religion. You can see that Jews of no religion are almost 80% intermarried. But what does the individual rate mean? It means that a majority of Jewish households that are married are intermarried. And this is something that I have to create myself because Pew doesn't say it, and the Jewish community doesn't really talk about this. The couples rate, and here's how this works mathematically, and if you can still see me in the window, maybe I'll stop sharing for one more second to do this because it's a little bit tricky. But let's say there are only 4 Jews on the planet, right? And the intermarriage rate is 50%. I just showed you that the individual rate is 42%, but in the last 10 years, it's 62%. So let's just go with 50%, right? What happens when the individual rate for these 4 individuals is 50%? Well, these 2 Jews intermarry and create 2 households because their spouses are coming from outside the Jewish community. These two Jews marry each other, and they create one household. So a 50% individual rate is actually a 2-to-1 ratio of intermarried households to in-married households. And that's why the number of intermarried households has ballooned. And I mentioned that in 1970, they did a Jewish communal population survey that found a 33% intermarriage rate. And that 33% means a 50% household creation rate. So even in 1970, you were already having as many intermarried households created as in-married households. And the Jewish community was so freaked out by that study, they didn't do another 10-year study until 20 years after that, in 1990. And that freaked them out even more because it found a 52% intermarriage rate. But the point is, and I crunched these numbers, I ran it by the guy who runs the Pew Foundation and oversaw their study, and he wouldn't confirm my numbers, but he did say my methodology for getting those numbers was correct. This was from the 2013 survey. This Pac-Man has only closed his mouth even more since then. Anyway, the point is more intermarried households than in-married households. And the differentiator, though, is that most intermarried couples raise their children with some Jewish identity. Now, here is where my spin comes in. The top line is all Jews and how they raise their kids. And again, Pew is going to break things down: Jewish by religion, Jewish but not by religion, partly Jewish by religion, some mix, not Jewish. And we can have a conversation about what all that means. But the second line is in marriage, right? Where both spouses are Jewish. And according to this, 93% raise their children Jewish by religion. And when it's an intermarried household, the bottom line, only 28% raise their children Jewish by religion, only. And of course, that's where the narrative stops for the people who are unhappy about intermarriage, but it continues for me to the 29% additionally who are raising their kids Jewish, but not by religion. And what does that mean? By culture, by heritage, by identity, etc. And then 12% who are raising them partly Jewish by religion, which for Pew means Jewish plus some other religious heritage. Again, you can talk about what that means. Bottom line is, the majority of children being raised in intermarriage are being told you are Jewish or you are part Jewish, and they come out of that with a Jewish identity. So right now in America today, only about half of all Jews under 50 years old have two Jewish parents, right? The red box shows Jews who have both a Jewish mother and a Jewish father. And for all Jews, that's 69%. But when you start breaking it down by age 18 to 29, only a minority do. And then even age 30 to 49, only 55% have grew up with two Jewish parents instead of just one Jewish parent. So again, the breadth of intermarriage in America, in the Jewish community, is, I think, much bigger than folks have a sense of, because I'm not sure how much these numbers were dug into, or really, I think the bigger issue is there's not a good enough sense of what to do about it. Here's where the issue of Jews of no religion comes in. This was a way for Pew to capture the full number of American Jews. So they asked the question, what is your religion? And if you said Jewish from a long list of options, you are a Jew by religion. And that's it, end of that line of questioning. If you select none as your religion, or atheist or agnostic, or really anything else, they ask follow-up questions. But for those three, if they then say, do you have any Jewish parentage or cultural identity, etc., and you say yes to that, then you are a Jew of no religion. And there are now, they estimate, as you can see on the left column, third one down, Jews of no religion, 1.5 million people in America are what Pew calls Jews of no religion, making up a pretty significant percentage of all Jews. And I'm talking about them because of the huge overlap between intermarriage and Jews of no religion. By the way, you can see that it goes on the left, Jews by religion, Jews of no religion, and then there's this whole other section called Jewish background, and then below that, a section called Jewish affinity. The folks, and there's a lot of people there. There's 2.8 million people with Jewish background in America, and 1.4 million people with Jewish affinity. And Pew did not count any of them as Jewish in that total population number, including this group of 200,000 who are Jewish by religion and another religion. And this bothers me a little bit because if someone had checked Buddhist and Jewish, they would not be included as Jewish. And I think many of us know Jew-boos and know that Buddhism is not in conflict with being Jewish in the same way that, say, someone who might have checked Christian and Jewish at the same time. Although even then, you can drill down and ask them, what do they mean by that? Jews of no religion is the fastest growing segment of the Jewish community, if you agree with the way Pew breaks it down. Right now, it's 27% of all Jews. When they did it in 2013, it was 22%. And you can see when they break it down by age 18 to 29 is now 40% Jews of no religion. And most Jews who are children of intermarriage, most Jews of no religion, are children of intermarriage. So again, if you look at the first red box, Jews of no religion, only 40% of them have two Jewish parents. Likewise, a good number of Jews of no religion are intermarried. Their spouse is not Jewish, which is the bottom red box. So there's this big overlap between Jews of no religion. And while Pew didn't dive into it, I think one of the reasons is when you ask a child of intermarriage, what is your religion? Many of them are hesitant to claim Judaism as a mantle, regardless of belief, because of life experiences. We can talk about that as well. So what does Jewish, and by the way, I'm leaving lots of time for us to have that conversation. I just kind of want to give us enough to talk about, so I'm kind of blowing through these slides. But I do want to talk about what are the results of some of these numbers. Pew asked, is being Jewish mainly about religion, ancestry, or culture? And you could also choose two or all three. And when you just add up the people who answered without including religion, most Jews answered this question without including religion. Most Jews, 53%, said Judaism is either mainly about ancestry or mainly about culture or mainly about ancestry and culture, right? 53%. And among intermarried Jews, 68% said that, right? So again, the disengagement from religious Judaism, but the continuation of Jewish identity in other ways among the intermarried. And I'm going to talk about belief because, like I'm trying to get at, there's this kind of relationship. Only 26% of American Jews believe in the God of the Bible. And Pew asked this question, and as far as I know, this is the first time it's ever been asked in a Jewish demographic study. Do you believe in the God of the Bible? Only 26% of American Jews said yes. Orthodox Jews make up 10% of American Jews. Almost all of them said yes to this question. So you can imagine what a lower percentage it is among non-Orthodox Jews. And I think that opens up a lot of questions in general for the Jewish community. Most Jews believe in something. So here you have this top line of all Jews, 26%, as I said, believe in the God of the Bible. 50%, so there's a follow-up question. If you said no to that, do you believe in any other higher power or spiritual force? 50% said yes to that. And 22% are flat out atheist agnostic, which is a much higher rate than the 10% of all Americans. But even when you break it down between Jews by religion and Jews of no religion, Jews by religion still have 14% of them who are just flat out atheist agnostic. And Jews of no religion, half of them have some kind of belief in another higher power and spiritual force. So again, this name, Jews of no religion, is what Pew labeled people who didn't answer that their religion is Judaism on the first go around, but then answered yes to, do you have any other connection to being Jewish? What are the results? Either of intermarriage and or lack of belief in the God of the Bible. Synagogue membership is very low in the United States among all Jews. It's only 35% at any given time, and among intermarried Jews, it's only 13%. Again, I'm trying to make the case that intermarried Jews and intermarried households are overwhelmingly secular and more secular than the Jewish community at large. What does this mean in terms of who we are and what we value and how it might differ between intermarried and in-married households? And again, for decades, the dichotomy in Jewish communal sociology was intermarried versus in-marriage, and how much more Jewish the in-married are than the intermarried in study after study. And to Pew's credit, they didn't do that. They didn't break it down like that, but they replaced that dichotomy between Jews by religion and Jews of no religion. Is this an improvement? Maybe. I don't know. It's still a dichotomy. It's still, I think, a false dichotomy and a problematic one. We can talk a little bit about why that is. But the point is, over and over again in the Pew survey, they show how Jews of no religion are less than Jews by religion. And as I said, the overlap between intermarriage and in-marriage is huge between these groups. So to me, this felt kind of like a coded way of doing what they had been doing in Jewish sociology all along, of saying how much less than intermarried Jews are than in-married Jews. So these are all kinds of categories, like did you have a Seder last year? Did you have a life milestone like a bar mitzvah, et cetera, et cetera. And the middle column is Jews by religion. The right column is Jews of no religion, and over again, Jews of no religion do Jewish things less. They are less Jewishly educated, less synagogue affiliated, less emotionally attached to Israel, less emphasis on being Jewish or belonging to the Jewish people, less care about having Jewish grandchildren, and less Jewish friends. These are all specific questions that Pew asked and then broke the answer down between Jews by religion, Jews of no religion. What they don't get at, though, and the questions that they don't ask, are questions that would show how Jews of no religion are more than, and what the values are that Jews of no religion, and again, I would argue by extension, intermarried Jews are more than. And so you may remember stereos that used to have those sliders. It's just a nice way to illustrate spectrums, right? So what are the spectrums that Jews are on? There's secular to religious, there's liberal to conservative, and then I think related to all of it is universalism to particularism. And I would argue that both Jews of no religion and intermarried Jews have our sliders closer to universalism than particularism. And what I mean by that is particularism being your focus is primarily on your group, and universalism is your focus is on humanity. And this has always been the tension in Judaism. Of course, the great quote by Rabbi Hillel, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? That's very particular. If I am not for others, what am I? That's the universal. And if not now, when? This has always been the tension that the Jewish community has balanced. Those of us who are affiliated with communities understand that there's a focus on serving other Jews in need, supporting Israel. Like many of the causes within the organized Jewish community are about other Jews. And there are many, many Jews who are not involved with that because their vision of the world is a more universalist one. The value that all people are equal, right? I talked about the messages I received when I was a kid about how to judge people. This was overall the positive message I received, except when it came to intermarriage. I just extended it to intermarriage, but I think this is a very positive value that I want to advance. Jews of no religion are overwhelmingly intermarried, as I pointed out in the previous numbers. Almost 80% of Jews of no religion are intermarried, and 60% of Jews of no religion are themselves the children of intermarriage. Emerging from that is a positive value of diversity. Jews of no religion are more inclusive. They're more than twice as likely to be part of a multiracial home, and they are twice as likely to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, etc. So this was my interfaith, intercultural, interracial marriage. It was less than 20 years ago. It was a little more than 20 pounds ago. But my wife is from Japan. We did a Japanese wedding. Our ketubah has Hebrew, English, and Japanese on it. Those are her parents in the background. They did a hora. The most expensive garment at my wedding was not my wife's wedding dress, but my mother-in-law's kimono. And I think all of our guests had a wonderful time learning about each other's cultures. We played it up, and it was great. And I feel terrible for folks who think this is a threat to Judaism or that I'm doing something wrong by celebrating multiculturally, but I am not really a Jew by religion. And again, happy to talk about that. What is going away? There are sweeping societal changes that have been with us now for decades, and it's not going away for everybody, just half or more of us. Ethnicity, right? I haven't done the 23andMe because it's going to come out 99.9% Ashkenazic Jewish. That is my ethnicity. I will always be Ashkenazic Jewish by ethnicity. My children are mixed race. They are not going to have that same connection. Their ethnicity is mixed. They have a connection to being Jewish. They have a connection to being Japanese American, and they have a connection to being American. But that piece ends with me, right? Denominationalism is challenged by a new approach to who's a Jew. Religiosity, the notion that morality is based on God's will, when you saw that the overwhelming majority of Jews don't believe in that God. And the notion of Jewish obligation, that you should do anything because you're Jewish, right? It has to have, you have to understand the meaning in doing it. People are just not going to follow blindly. And intermarriage has accelerated these changes, right? When you have multiple heritages, like my children do, if one of them demands loyalty, my kids are just going to be like, well, that's ridiculous. Why would you ask me to give up on my Japanese grandparents so that you can deem me Jewish enough, right? It's a non-starter. When you have access to multiple religious narratives, I think it calls all of those narratives into question. And by the way, this trend of secularization is happening all across America in lots of religious communities. And I think that the case for particularism is harder to make when universalism is so appealing and exists within your own household. Humanistic Judaism is the only denomination that can say intermarriage is good, period, no strings attached. I mentioned a couple of the strings in the other denominations. I will say that Reform, Reconstructionism have done amazing things to include intermarried families, one of which was in 1983, so very early on, and actually 79 for Recon, I believe, 83 for Reform. They dropped matrilineal descent, which was the tradition that you're Jewish if your mother's Jewish, doesn't matter what your father is. And those liberal denominations said, as long as you have one Jewish parent, we're going to accept you as Jewish, and you're raised Jewish. And that was a radical departure. It was very controversial at the time. It caused a lot of angst, but it has allowed, literally, I would argue, hundreds of thousands of American Jews to stay Jewish, to stay connected to Judaism. And I think it was tremendous. And yet, there are still barriers to participation within synagogue communities in all of those denominations, there is privilege given to Jews over non-Jews. And I understand where that comes from in a religious context. But as I said, I don't connect to my Jewish identity through that religion. So I think it's one of the reasons why people are walking away from it, because I think a lot of people are challenged by that. In Humanistic Judaism, we're not doing religion, we're doing Jewish culture, and anybody can do any of it. But I acknowledge that if you're looking for religious Judaism, that's not going to work for you. And it does raise complicated questions about who is a Jew and what happens to Jewish continuity. But I have been in this business for 25 years, and I've been hearing the warnings over and over again, and they way predate when I got into this. And yet, you look at the numbers, more Jews than ever. They are connecting in different ways than the Jewish community might want them to, but they're still identifying as Jewish. It still is providing some kind of meaning for them. But I think it puts a challenge to those of us working in the organized Jewish community to give better answers. I don't think our community should continue to privilege in marriage, but we do have to answer questions like, why be Jewish? So I would say we need to articulate the benefit. Why do holiday and life cycle rituals Jewishly? What is the benefit? I had a Jewish wedding. I was married by a rabbi. I incorporated cultural elements of my wife's heritage. But why? You know, what was the meaning that I wanted to bring into it? Why be in a community beyond friends and family? What is still relevant from our backgrounds and traditions that we want to take with us, even if we're no longer necessarily participating in organized religion? And in order to do this, I think we need to talk about it. You know, I don't think, to me, that number, only 26% of US Jews believe in the God of the Bible, that to me is big news. And there was no headline about that in the Jewish newspapers. Folks don't really know how to talk about this. And I'd like to open up the conversation. I'm not trying to deconvert anybody, but I want my views represented along with others, especially when I see that I'm kind of in a significant percentage of Jews. And I rarely hear our positions articulated and our beliefs and choices affirmed. So I would argue for placing meaning over identity, right? Identity often gets confused for genetics, right? And I think it's about choices, and it's about meaning and why you would do anything. What does Judaism do for you? How does Jewish community benefit your life? And to me, there's really three things I use to judge anything I do. Does it improve my life? Does it improve my family's life? Does it help me make the world a better place? And by the way, this is that universal versus particular, right? The particular is my life and my family's life, which has to come first, frankly. But then the universal, how does it help me make the world a better place? I think one of the challenges I want to mention before I end is that as of 2014, only 10% of married Jewish communal professionals are intermarried. And, you know, I just showed you that we're approaching a point where the majority of American Jews, Jewish households certainly are already intermarried, and individual Jews were approaching the point where the majority are intermarried. And yet that's not reflected by who runs the organized Jewish community. And I think that creates a real disconnect. And I will answer from a humanistic Judaism perspective one of the challenges it raises, which is who is a Jew? And this is from a statement made in 1988 that a Jew is a person of Jewish descent, or any person who declares him or herself to be a Jew and who identifies with the history, ethical values, culture, civilization, community, and faith of the Jewish people. They left out religion. I would include religion in that too, but the point is, bottom line, if you tell me you're Jewish, I'm not asking for your bona fides. I'm not asking which of your parents was Jewish. I just say, that's great, you know, me too. So recognizing, again, this is not necessarily how the majority of the organized Jewish community approaches it, but it's one way that we've addressed it. And as I said, humanistic Judaism is an approach of Jewish identity that removes the religious aspect, but retains all of those other rituals like holiday celebrations and life cycle events, Jewish education for youth and adults. And it looks a lot like synagogue community, but we never are asking folks to say things that they may not believe, which for many, many Jews is the traditional Jewish liturgy. So that has been the one change that we've made, but it has allowed many, many people to continue to connect to an organized Jewish community. And I believe, even though we're a very small denomination, that we have the highest percentage of intermarriage of any denomination. Most of our rabbis are intermarried. All of our rabbis officiate at intermarriage and co-officiate at intermarriage. And we celebrate intermarriage, as I said, with no strings attached, because love is love. And we celebrate in marriage because love is love. And we celebrate LGBTQ marriage. And if you don't want to get married, we'll celebrate that too. You know, we're hoping that people will find meaning and fulfillment in their lives. That's the goal for us. And we're not going to attach strings to it if consenting adults are able to find love in whatever family configuration that they find it. So I will stop there. I see that there may be a couple of things in the chat, but I'm happy to open it up to questions, conversation, pushback. What do you think? If you want to, I think we're a small enough group where if you just want to unmute yourself and talk, that should be fine. Or if you want to raise your hand. Joyce, hi Joyce.
Hi, Paul. Good to see you. I have had one relative, well, I should say I have a friend who's not Jewish. She was raised Catholic. She married somebody Jewish, and she was just telling me they're members of their local conservative synagogue in a New York, I guess a New York City suburb. And her child was bar mitzvahed, and she as the mom was not allowed up on the bima. And I just have to say, it just breaks my heart to hear this in this day and age. And so I just wanted your response to that, because it really was killing me.
It breaks my heart too. And the reason why it breaks my heart is because that's not religion, that's culture. So there is nothing about a bima in the Torah or the Talmud even, because they didn't have it at that point yet. You know, this is a modern addition to Judaism that was frankly emulating Protestantism. And so the whole notion of who can stand on the bima is just decisions that are made in the cultural context of a synagogue. And the argument for preventing the non-Jewish spouse onto the bima is that it quote unquote sets a bad example. And here's a woman who has dedicated years of her life to give her kid a Jewish education and thousands of dollars if she's in the suburbs of New York to synagogue membership. And then, you know, she's not asking for an aliyah to the Torah, right? She's not asking to make a blessing. She can just stand there. I will say that most conservative synagogues now have gotten over that aspect of it. And that was one of the things that they had to address. And most conservative synagogues now will invite the non-Jewish parent and the non-Jewish grandparents.
Well, and maybe I misspoke. I think what she said was she couldn't do an aliyah. I mean, maybe she was up there. I think she was up there, but she was not allowed to do an aliyah.
Okay, so the thing about the bima was true up until a few years ago. And in some conservative synagogues, they're still having that conversation. As for who can do an aliyah, there is a religious argument about only Jews can say these words, and yet there are cultural ways around it. So for example, if her spouse, who's Jewish, was given the aliyah and she just stands there, you know, is she upset that she couldn't say those words too? You know, then conservative Judaism is not the right kind of Judaism for her. And so I want to be fair and say, you can have whatever brand of Judaism you want, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. So if conservative Judaism wants to double down on saying we are not the place for intermarried households, then they should. But that's not their message, right? You would never go to an Orthodox synagogue and say, I'm not Jewish, I demand an aliyah to the Torah. You understand why that's prohibited. But the conservative movement has made attempts to be inclusive and yet maintains those kind of boundaries, and it's very difficult for them. Jonathan, but thank you, George. Jonathan.
Thank you, Paul, very much. Before I ask my question, I just want to reinforce what Joyce said. There's this prejudice in Orthodox Judaism that a woman with a period shouldn't come near the Torah, shouldn't touch the Torah. But the truth is that the Torah is so sacred that it makes pure anything that's impure. It's not that somebody who is literally impure mucks up the Torah. It's the opposite direction. So the notion that a non-Jew on the pulpit somehow desecrates the Torah or Torah ritual is absurd. That the idea is that everyone should come close as possible to the Torah, and people benefit from being close to the Torah. So that's the true Jewish value. And it's in fact a halakhic value.
I really appreciate that. And one of the things that's great about Judaism is you can find the argument that you want to make pretty much within somewhere in the Torah, right? And so it's lovely for having those kind of debates and trying to persuade based on the tradition. And like not but, and many of us want to make the case that what our ancestors thought about things is interesting and may be relevant, but it may no longer be relevant. And we don't have to make the case based on that. We can make the case based on what life is like right now. And so I don't think the Torah is holy, me personally. And that's not the argument I would make, but I love that there is a Jewish religious argument to push back on it. And then there is a kind of an openly secular argument as well. And I think we're actually stronger as a community if we could just have open conversation about it without putting your belief or my belief down. It's just different. It's just different. And
let me ask my question.
Oh, I thought that was your question.
No, that was a comment before my question.
Go for it.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay. So the headline of my question is that while I appreciate and respect and admire everything you've done in your life, I think that the ultimate question really is how do the grandchildren identify?
Let me ask.
I want to just complicate the question a bit. You all know the story in the Torah that God appears to Abraham and chooses Abraham, and Judaism flows from this God-centered narrative. But one of the earliest stories among the rabbis is another story you all know about Abraham breaking his father's idols. His father was an idol seller. And when his father returned home with new clay to make more idols, found that all the idols were broken in the shop except one, where his son Abraham had put the hammer. And he yelled at his son for breaking all the idols. And his son Abraham said, I didn't do it. That idol over there did it. Don't blame me. And his father said, what are you talking about? Idols can't do anything. And Abraham said, so what do you worship them for? And thus began the religion of Judaism, and what you're referring to as the biblical God. But that story indicates to us that the earliest rabbis were humanistic Jews. They did not believe in a universe in which God interferes in history or in human affairs. They turned it around and made it Abraham who discovered God. And so my point is that humanism is at least an equal part of traditional Judaism, maybe even a stronger part of traditional Judaism, and that one needn't leave a religious Jewish community to be a quote unquote humanistic Jew And if one does, I'm asking, what about the grandchildren?
Okay, I appreciate that. Let me, in the great Jewish tradition of answering a question with a question, do you express your Jewish identity in the same way that your grandparents did?
Of course I don't. But
There's your answer.
my Jewish identity is just as strong. I actually think it's maybe stronger.
And
but
there's your answer
just as
too.
strong. If somebody asks me, who am I tell them I'm Jewish.
That's
I'm an
right.
American Jew, right? My grandchildren, my grandchildren won't be able to say that. They won't say, they'll say my parents, they'll say, I'm a little of each, or I had a Jewish grandparent, but they won't say they're Jewish. They'll say I'm an American. I'm a universalist.
Maybe, but maybe they'll say my kids will say I'm Jewish and Japanese American. Maybe my kids will marry somebody who is half Guatemalan and half Irish, and then their kids will say I have heritages that I celebrate from all around the world, and
That's right.
I'm okay
You're
with
saying
that.
it right. Your kids are half, and the grandchildren are a quarter, and their children are going to be an eighth. And
But
so,
that's
if you're
right.
talking
And
about,
so I appreciate it, Jonathan. What I'm saying is it's about meaning. And if my kids find all of their meaning through their Japanese heritage and leave Judaism behind, I admit I will feel a bit of a loss. But that is not my highest priority for them. And that is not even, I would say, I'm not even sure it's in the top 10, right? I want them to be healthy. I want them to be happy. I want them to be fulfilled. I want them to be good people and do good in the world. All of these values I have for them don't put Jewish above all of it, right? And so so all I can do is model for them why I find being Jewish meaningful, which I think I do. And if they take me up on it, that's fine. But if my grandparents had been told in the 1930s, when they were young people, that their grandkids, first of all, the only Yiddish they would know is like schmuck and tuchus, and that that their grandkids were not at all involved in the labor movement, right? And on the other hand, I'm at least third generation atheist Jew. So, they were with me, I think, on that. But, they were in Poland speaking Yiddish and fighting for labor rights. And I live a completely different life.
Paul, it's because they were Jewish that they fought for labor rights. It's because they're Jewish that 75% of American Jews vote Democratic.
I know. So the point is, all I can do is hope to provide some meaning and that my kids will take me up on it. But my point with all those numbers is many, many, many children of intermarriage and people who are even tangentially connected, like maybe a grandparent or great grandparent, or they do the 23andMe and they find out they have some Jewish heritage, all of a sudden want to take it on. And why? Because of the value of being, frankly, having a minority experience, and I think that engenders empathy for all others who have a minority experience. I think there's lots of reasons, but everyone has to come to that themselves. But I appreciate it, Jonathan, but Judith has been waiting with her hand up patiently, so I want to let her speak.
And
as well.
also, Paul, Lynn has a question in the chat that she put in earlier, so I have to
Okay,
just...
so Judith, why don't you ask the question and I'll try to find Lynn's question too.
Well, yeah, I want to kind of point out that it's interesting how few people are Orthodox, and yet we kind of the Jewish community kind of acts as if Judaism Orthodox Judaism is normative Judaism. But second of all, I wanted to point out an experience also of some friends of mine who are Russian refugees. And so they went to, my friend with her husband, who is not Jewish, went to a Reform rabbi to have him marry them. And he would only do it under the condition that her husband converted, and he decided not to. And so they wouldn't do it. The rabbi wouldn't marry them. And so they were alienated from Judaism for a while. And then Chabad found them. And Chabad, by that time they had 3 children, and Chabad was like, we don't care, come on over. And so Chabad, like, like, their model is the mother's Jewish, so the kids are Jewish. But it's just an interesting, the paradox of like the so-called liberal like establishment pushing them away. And then, I mean, Chabad wouldn't have done the marriage either, most certainly, but they didn't catch them at that point. But liberal Judaism has never reached out to them again or tried to retain them, or like said, if we don't do the marriage, they're going to feel alienated. And I also put the comment in the chat, but I'm half Jewish. I'm lineally Jewish. My identity is Jewish, and my children are Jewish. So it works. You can have like 2 Jewish grandparents or 1 Jewish grandparent and still feel Jewish. Like, people can stop feeling so anxious about that.
That's awesome. And thank you for sharing that, and for being here, for sharing that last part. The part about the rabbi who turns people away for marriage, it has happened so much. And again, I look at those numbers from Pew and I'm astonished that despite all of that, people still raise their kids with a Jewish identity, and what the power in that means, despite getting pushed away by organized community. But when you look at how few Jews participate in organized Jewish community, and the reaction is blame intermarriage, right? Blame them for not participating in Jewish community. Blame them for not finding meaning in Jewish community, when it was who's slamming the door on their face. And so, look, there was a big fear about this in the 60s and 70s, but this is 2020, and like, it is demonstrated over and over again that interfaith, intercultural couples who say they want Judaism in their life will raise Jewish kids. And what more do you need? It's frankly xenophobia. It is xenophobia, it's fear of the other, and it's laziness, because it is harder to work with an interfaith couple than to just tell an in-marrying couple what they need to do Jewishly. And it's very upsetting to me, because we're talking about real people, real people who are being pushed away. And Russian immigrants are some of the most secularized people on the planet. There wasn't a competing religion in that household that the rabbi had to worry about, even if that's the kind of thing that rabbi worries about. So that's disappointing. As far as Orthodox Judaism being normative or having privilege, look, I mean, first of all, they got the outfits, right? I mean, it's like they're visibly identified as Jewish, and again, there's a laziness to it. There's a, hey, oh, they must know. There's a deference there. Liberal Jews make other liberal Jews feel bad about how little they do know, and so the Orthodox have an authority about things. I don't want to talk in broad sweeps about any groups of people. I think with all groups of people, there are great, wonderful, kind, caring people, and there are people who are jerks in all groups. Even Humanistic Judaism, I'll even throw in here. But the privilege that is given, or the deference to orthodoxy, has clear damage done. And so I live in New York City, and there are all kinds of lawsuits now because there are 24 or so ultra-Orthodox yeshivot that don't, Jewish schools that don't teach their kids secular education past like a 3rd grade level, really, especially the boys, who like by 6th grade are only studying Talmud, are only speaking in Yiddish or Hebrew. And I've met folks who've come out of that community, and it's a cult, and I'm just going to call it a cult because it has all of the signposts of cult indoctrination, and they can't leave. They are unequipped to function in American society. And that has to change, right? This has nothing to do with belief or non-belief. This is about abiding by America's laws. The laws are on the books already in New York State about providing secular education, even if you're a religious school. So those kind of things are very disturbing. And the reason why they're not called out by politicians is because they vote as a bloc. But why aren't they called out by UJA Federation of New York, right? Because of the seeming power that they wield, despite what Pew says their numbers are. So it's a big challenge, but I think that one of the things I want to do is advocate for authenticity of all kinds of Jewish expression. I'm not saying Orthodoxy is inauthentic, but I'm not saying, I disagree with the notion that that's real Judaism, and anything else is watered down. And so I hope I don't get too emotional or demonstrative about that, but I obviously feel strongly about the deference given to what I think is in many ways a really damaging theology that, luckily most Jews don't abide by. But if you're going to have some kind of, event at the White House, even with Biden, you're going to have disproportionate representation among you by the Orthodox. So Lynn's question is, how do participants view the current upsurge in anti-Jewish bigotry events despite the supposed less discriminatory and more inclusive views among our younger Americans? It's disturbing. And, one of the nice things I get to do in my role at the Society for Humanistic Judaism is be in collaboration with other organizations that are advocating for secular Americans. So these are not Jewish organizations, but they're organizations like American Humanist Association. And their annual conference was this past weekend, and every group has 5 minutes to talk about what you've been working on. And I used a part of my time to talk about that any of our affiliated congregations that are expecting more than 50 or so attendees to high holiday services will have to either notify law enforcement or hire private security or talk about what to do if there's an active shooter, all of the security preparations that are happening now, and that's happening across the Jewish community in America. And the people in the room were shocked and they had no idea. And I was at a conference, I was saying this at a conference for non-believers in America. And afterwards I asked the exec of that organization, did you think at all about security for this conference? And he said, not until you mentioned it, right? So here we are as open atheist agnostics having a conference in Virginia, and there was no thought of security, but every Jewish community is thinking about this. So yeah, it's very disturbing. And at the same time, every time I see something that says anti-Semitism is at an all-time high in America, I think, really? Because wasn't there a time when Jews couldn't get into colleges and couldn't stay at a lot of hotels and couldn't move into certain neighborhoods? I mean, and Father Coughlin and Henry Ford and Charles Lindbergh were spouting horrific pro-Nazi stuff. So let's put it a little bit into perspective that, stuff has been normalized now that wasn't the case 8 years ago. And it's very disturbing and we need to fight back. At the same time, we are in a different place than we were even 40 years ago as far as how Americans view Jews. And I would argue a piece of that is intermarriage, that there's now a Jew around many more Thanksgiving tables today than there ever were in American history because of intermarriage. People are aware of a Jewish relative that they have. So anytime they hear some kind of awful stereotype, they're like, well, but my brother-in-law is Jewish and he's not like that. So I don't think Americans in general are anywhere near as anti-Semitic as they were in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But at the same time, obviously, what's happening is very concerning and we need to push back. But I would argue it's a segment of the population that has been unleashed. And I will name it, which is white Christian nationalism, is the issue that I think relates to so many things that we're trying to address. And I'll just put in a little plug for our pluralistic initiative. It's run by Society for Humanistic Judaism, but it's open to all Jews. It's called Jews for a Secular Democracy. And we are directly taking on white Christian nationalism and the way that it impacts life in America. So I'll just put that link in the chat. Any other thoughts or questions? Well, I really appreciate allowing me to have this time with you. And if you have any thoughts or questions afterwards and you want to be in touch, feel free to email me. I'm pretty easy to find. Our website is shj.org. And again, I really appreciate. Do I Zoom weekly on different topics? Well, I Zoom daily, but with my staff and everything. Not weekly, but I'll tell you what, if you go to shj.org, the top of every single page, there's a little paper airplane to sign up for our very occasional email. It's less than once a week. I won't bombard you with emails, but that's the way to stay up to date on what we're offering. But we do a lot of things, and we highlight what our affiliated communities, like the one there in the Triangle of North Carolina, offer folks. And if you are in that area, I encourage you to get in touch with Kathy Moore at Kol Haskalah and learn what they're doing as well. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great night. And thank you, Malin, for coordinating all of this.
Thank you for being here. Thank you so much, Kathy, for organizing. Have a great night.